Question 4 on the impact of war on Britain paper asks you how reliable are two sources, and it gives you a particular focus for the question. So in this case is how reliable are sources A and E about changing attitudes towards women at the end of the First World War. Explain your answer using sources A and E and your own knowledge. Now, this podcast will take you through the structure of the answer. Throughout it uses the same two sources, which as you can see, you've got source A, an official war painting, and source E from a report by the Chief Inspector of Factories in 1919. It's worth 10 marks, 15 minutes. In 15 minutes you should be writing a paragraphed answer, as you'll see. The recommendation is write 4 paragraphs. That's an introduction, a conclusion, and 2 substantial paragraphs in the middle. And I'll take you through that structure in a second. And at the end of the podcast, I'll show you a model answer using these exact same 2 sources. So I won't talk at length in this podcast about what the answer is. You'll need to pause the podcast at the end and read that answer. And of course the answer, you can click on it and open that answer, the model answer, on the revision page in Frog, and go through that, but you'll see the model answer at the end. First thing you always do with the reliability question is spend a minute or two having a quick look at the provenance and picking up the clues in the provenance. The question is at the end of the First World War. It's focusing at the end, really important, and it says and your own knowledge. So unpick that question. Because you're using your own knowledge at the end of the First World War, you should be thinking to yourself the war was going badly by 1917. There's source A, it's 1917. You might want to comment specifically about what the state of the war was. It had reached stalemate. It was the year after the Battle of the Somme, etc. It is an official war painting. That's an important aspect you need to be picking up from the provenance. Produced by the government, you should be immediately thinking to yourself, propaganda. Again, that's own knowledge. You're aware of the fact that Defence of the Realm Act and censorship, so you could bring that into the answer. Looking at source E, it's 1919, so straight away own knowledge, the first year after the end of the war, because the war ended in November 1918. So that's own knowledge. A report by the Chief Inspector of Factories. Now, a report by an inspector would try to establish the truth. It would be factual, so therefore it would not be propaganda. You'll see in a second, you're talking about issues such as purpose, authority. Are they in a position to know the truth? Clearly with source E, his job is to inspect. He would be in a position to know the facts, whereas source A is clearly the purpose is not to establish the facts, but the purpose would be to recruit women, to get women to work in the factories, to paint a picture that it was a positive experience. So all of those things should be running through your mind before you even put pen to paper. Really, really think about it. Too many candidates just leap into the answer without actually thinking about the keywords and how you're going to answer that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through the Okay, so the structure. The guidance is write a 5-paragraph answer. Sorry for that. Again, there's a mistake there, my mistake. That would be 4, I can't count. A 4-paragraph. As you can see, the introduction and the conclusion are just brief, maximum 2 minutes. Introduction, briefly, use your own knowledge to put the sources into context. So with this, you've got one source. The first is 1917, the second is 1919. So you're saying it's towards the end of the war was going badly. Following the Battle of the Somme, it reached stalemate, and at the end of the war, when the war ended, women were expected to leave the factories and vacate their jobs for the men. Something like that. Literally, as I said it, you could write that down in 1 or 2 sentences. In literally 1 minute, maximum of 2. What you then do in paragraph 1 is you use your own knowledge to corroborate or challenge the sources. Okay, corroborate means to say yes, I think that what the source is saying is true, and you're using your own knowledge to do that. And moving towards a statement, are they typical? And I'll take you through this in a slide in a second. And then paragraph 2, you focus on the purpose and authority of the sources, of both those sources, A and E. Now again, the timing there, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, that's the bulk of your answer on those 2 paragraphs. And then in your conclusion, you weigh the evidence. So moving to a little bit more detail about how to do that. Okay, so first of all, the corroboration and or challenge aspect of it. What you're doing is you're using your own knowledge to test out accuracy. E.g., this was the case because, or e.g., this was not the case because. Okay, so for example, you look at source A. The conditions in the factory look very pleasant. They look clean. They look safe. Your own knowledge, you know that in 1917 there was a major disaster at an armaments factory called Silvertown. It's in the notes, you should know it, that resulted in scores of women being killed. That's because conditions were not safe. So you simply say, from my own knowledge, I know that the conditions were not that safe because, and mention the Silvertown accident. So clearly, therefore, the information is not that reliable that you're looking at there. And so that's exactly how you would do that. Source E, you could corroborate, you could say, from my own knowledge, I know that this actually was the case. Okay, so you could say that from my own knowledge, at the end of the war, nearly all women did vacate their jobs, nearly all men did take over their jobs. So again, you could do that. Moving on. In the same paragraph, comment on what we call typicality. Now, quite a few words here, but basically it's a very simple concept. Is this information typical of the period that the question is about, or is it untypical? If untypical, it may be specific to one moment in time, but not the whole war, and use your own knowledge to explain. You could say here, sources A and E, you got information about 1917, you got information about 1919. They don't actually say anything about 1918. On the whole, though, those 2 sources I would say are fairly typical. They do cover the period, but you can have a look at the model answer towards the end and see what it says there. If untypical, it may be specific to one geographical area. It doesn't apply in this particular case, but you may get a question that asks you about the reaction of women to the war across the whole of England. Okay, in England, and the 2 sources may be both from London, say. Okay, now what you do here is you say, well, these 2 sources are very narrow, they're only from one city. It doesn't tell you about how women in the north of England would have felt about the war. Okay, so you're commenting about reliability. That's a good example of typicality. It doesn't apply with this particular answer, with this particular example. Moving on. Your next paragraph focuses in on authority. Okay, and you simply ask the question, is the author of the source in a position that they would know what they are talking about? Okay. Now clearly, source E is a report by the Chief Inspector. He would be in a position to know what he's talking about. He would have access to all the factories because it's his job to inspect factories. So he would be in a position to know. The person who's in source A, who's doing an official war painting, may never have been in a factory. His job is to do what he's told. He's probably just sitting in his room somewhere. He's been told by a member of the government, paint a picture of a factory that makes women's conditions look good because we want women to work in the factories. So he therefore is not in a position to necessarily know what he is painting a picture about. So it all comes down to the job and the position of authority. So that's very, very relevant to the question. Now, within the same paragraph, you don't just talk about authority, you also talk about purpose. So here's the final slide, which is, can you trust the author to be honest about what they're saying? Now, for example, the painter of the picture may have believed that's what women the conditions were like for women, but he may be unconsciously not telling the truth because he has basically been told, paint a picture like this. So you've got to get into, can you trust the author? Is the author in a position to be trusted? Now, there's two examples here of the way you can do this. Are they deliberately being biased? Now remember, never ever just state bias and without then developing it and by talking about what they wanted to achieve. Okay, that's really important. So if you're deliberately biased, you actually know that you're being one-sided. You're deliberately leaving information out. Okay, so the government official who said it with Source A, I want you to paint a picture that shows the conditions to be very clean, do not put in any dirt. When you draw that picture, that is obviously being deliberately biased because it's deliberately leaving out information. On the other hand, sometimes they may think they are telling the truth without actually knowing it. So the painter of that particular picture may genuinely believe that's what the conditions are like because that's what he's been told. He's just simply doing his job, painting a picture. So he is being biased, he is leaving out the dirt and the unsafe aspects of it. But he may genuinely think he's telling the truth, but nevertheless it is still one-sided, it is still unreliable. So those are the issues you need to talk through there. Similarly with Source E. Now again, I won't go through that, you can look at the model answer in a second. So, best advice, you have a go at writing an answer to that. Okay. When you've done that, compare your answer to the model answer. Now there is the model answer. I won't take you through the content, read it yourself. You can see that I have colour-coded it, so you can, in green where there's own knowledge, red where it's commenting on typicality and corroboration and challenge, blue where it's commenting on purpose, purple where it's commenting on authority, where they're in a position to actually know. Alongside to the right, you can see I've annotated it. It follows exactly the structure I just described. So there's your introduction, the first paragraph. The second paragraph there is corroboration, challenge and typicality. The third paragraph I've actually broken into two smaller paragraphs, one on Source A and one on Source E, but that is the focus on authority and purpose. That's entirely up to you. There is simply so much to put across, it seems sensible with that example to break it into two paragraphs, but you don't have to do that. And then obviously the final paragraph is the conclusion. So it's all there for you with that particular example. I hope that was useful to you.